So in this chapter, we were looking at basically two main things. One is polynomial. Second, rational functions. And then at the very, very beginning of the chapter, we kind of look at both when they were just power functions, where it was just one term. So we finish off polynomials, knowing how they should look like by graphing and predicting, all that stuff. And then now we're going to look at rational functions, not just the graph, but also how to solve them. So let's look at this question. F of x over g of x is equal to 0. Which one, f or g, which one has to be 0 in order for this whole thing to be 0? F of x. Okay, because if g of x becomes 0, then what happens? Undefined. Okay, so this is only going to be 0 if f of x is 0. So only when the numerator is 0, the whole thing is 0. When the denominator is 0, then we have problems. We have asymptotes or holes. So the key is we want to figure out what makes f of x 0, but it cannot also make g of x 0. Okay, so what makes the top 0, that's great, but it can't make the denominator 0 because that's going to make it undefined. All right, so I'm going to show you how to solve this. I used to show people two methods, but then it got them very confused. So I'm going to just show you one method. If you have another method of solving that you feel is better, you can do that, as long as it's consistent. The first thing you're always going to do when you're solving a rational function is look at the denominator. What number will make this undefined? 0. So you kind of want to write it on the side. X can't be 0. Whatever answer you get, it cannot be 0. If it's 0 and only 0, then you say no solution. All right, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to get rid of all the fractions at the same time by multiplying by the least common denominator. What is the least common denominator? X. Okay, so make sure you distribute it to everything. X squared plus 3 equals 4x. All right, this is very easy. We are going to solve this. How do we solve this? Factor, but before you factor, okay, minus 4x. X squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Now we just factor it and solve. Okay, you can do this. So go ahead and factor and solve. The answer just can't be 0. If it's 0, you can't choose that one. All right, x minus 1, x minus 3. So x is equal to what? 3 and 1. All right, none of them are zeros. There is no need to check. That is the answer. So this is probably the fastest way to solve this. Yes, question? The other way is to make them the same fraction. So you have to multiply everything by x over x. It's just really long. Yeah, so it's not the preferred way. All right, let's try another one. What can x not equal to? 4. All right, whatever you get, you cannot have it equal to 4. What is the least common denominator? X minus 4. Okay, so you're going to multiply that into everything, every term. So x times x minus 4 plus 1 equals to 0. Remember to factor and solve. It has to equal 0, okay? All right, this one is x squared minus 4x plus 1 equal to 0, which you cannot factor, so you got to use quadratic formula. So x is equal to 2 plus minus square root 3. All right, let's try it on our calculator. So you're going to graph the original function. We're trying to figure out when it's going to equal 0. When you're writing this whole thing, please be careful. You got to put this whole denominator in parentheses, or else it's not going to recognize the correct function. So when you're graphing this, or when you graphed it, it should look like this, right? Something like that. So the question is, when is this equal to 0? That is here and here, those two spots. So if you want to double check your answer later on, you could just check, use the calculator to find the zeros and then see if it's actually equal to 2 plus minus square root 3. So it should work. All right. Next one. Okay. When you have denominators that have that are in polynomial form, you need to factor them so you can see what is going on in the denominator. So what does this denominator factor to? Okay, x minus 1, x minus 3. So x can't equal what? 1 and 3. What is the least common denominator among all three terms? Huh? Yes, x minus 1, x minus 3. So we're going to multiply everything by x minus 1, x minus 3. Make sure you distribute that to every term. So I think you guys are pretty good. I probably don't have to show you how to do this. But just in case, I'll just show you once. So basically, you're multiplying this to every term. So x minus 1, x minus 3 times the first term. The first term is 2x over x minus 1. That x minus 1 is going to cancel. So you only are left with x minus 3. So that is, the first one is 2x times x minus 3. You're going to do the same thing with the second term. In the second term, x minus 3 cancels. So you're left with just x minus 1. And then in the last term, everything cancels. So you only have a 2. All right, so now you need to go ahead and solve it. Make sure that your answer is not 1 or 3. If it is, then it won't work. You have to not include it in your solution. Okay, let me know when you're done. Okay, so the first one, the answer is x equals to -1/2 because 3 doesn't work. And if you try this next one, it's the same idea. This one, everything that you solve is actually in the denominator, so this is no solution. Good. Okay, next one. Application question. How much pure acid must be added to 50 milliliters of a 35% acid solution to produce a mixture that is 75% acid? Oh, this is a very typical question, which I don't like very much because it takes me a long time to think. And I just do it kind of the not smart way. But if you have a great way of solving this kind of stuff, you can do it. So basically, pure acid, that means 100% acid. You need to add to something that has 35% acid so that you end up with something that's 75% acid. The question is how much? Okay, how much pure acid? That's going to be x. You're going to add to something that is 35% of a 50 milliliter. So 35% of a 50 milliliter mixture, you're going to add something that is 100%, so then it's just x, because 100% is 1. X represents the amount. And then you're going to end up with something that is 75% of how much? How much quantity do you have? Not 100. You don't. So you have 50 to start with. You're going to add something, and then you end up with something that's 75%. The question is how much quantity? Yes, 50 plus x. You have the 50 grams milliliter you start with, and then x amount that you're going to add. All right, so now you need to solve this. So the answer is 80. do you guys have problems setting this up? Like, can you set up the problem yourself? Maybe? Okay, maybe we can practice more word problems. All right, this last one, I like this one because you're gonna see this in calculus as well, but you're gonna solve it in calculus ways. Okay, so find the dimension of the rectangle with minimum perimeter if its area is 200 square meters. Find the least perimeter. What are they talking about? Draw a picture. Let's say this is length, this is width. You want to find a dimension. Okay, so you want to find length and width. With minimum perimeter. Okay, so you want to add up all the sides, and then that number needs to be as small as possible. But the area is 200. All right, so let's write that down. 200 is length times width. You want the perimeter to be as small as possible. What is the perimeter? Huh? What's that? Not quite. The perimeter of the entire rectangle. Yes. We want 2L plus 2W to be as small as possible, but the area has to maintain a 200. Okay, this is a little bit tricky. I'm going to let you and your partner figure this out. What are you gonna do to make P as small as possible? All right, so let me help you out. Those of you who found the answer by just kind of logically thinking about it, that's good. But I guess the mathematical way of doing this is we want to figure out the smallest perimeter possible. In this perimeter, there are two variables, L and W, so we cannot actually solve it. So we're going to use this to help us. Let's say that we kind of solve one in terms of the other, saying 200 over W is L. We can actually plug it in here. So then 2 times 200 over W plus 2W is equal to P. And then we're saying, what does W have to be so that P is as small as possible? So you would graph it. And then you look and say, what does W have to be so then P, which is the Y value, is as small as possible? Does that make sense? Okay, so you guys can try it and then figure out what that answer is. So if you look at a graph, it's gonna look like this, and this point is the smallest P or perimeter possible. So when W is 14.14, but also you can think about it logically. The smallest possible perimeter is when this shape is a square, because as one length gets longer, even if you try to keep it the same area, the perimeter is still too big. So basically, it's going to be square root of 200. So 10 root 2.